All right, everyone. We're going to do a quick after action report, day 2. This is Nathan Bennett. You can follow me at vnathanbennett on Twitter. I'm also on LinkedIn. You can find me at Nathan Bennett. I'm a cloud architect at Sterling Computers. One of the things that I really liked about today was just the ability to see what the different solutions were from a Kubernetes perspective. We had a lot of different discussions around Kubernetes today that was really enjoyable because I'm a kind of a Kubernetes fanboy, I guess you could say that. I don't really love Kubernetes to the point where I think that I am off base on a couple of my thinkings. I don't think that it is the end-all be-all solution, but I do think it's extremely powerful for what it can do. And that's one of the things that Kubernetes has brought to this table for developers and operators alike. But let's go over the specific vendors that we saw today. So we started with Stormforge. And Stormforge is really interesting because they focused in an area that I really didn't think that this was something that a lot of people would have problems with, which is resource management, specifically in a Kubernetes environment. Now, this area, the reason why I didn't think that this would be something that we'd hear from a vendor side at least, is because you have so many dedicated resource solutions to basically manage those yourself. So I can create a pod, create a replica set and a deployment, and I can dedicate how much resources are allowed. They're called resource limits, right? And they're these functions or articles that I put into my manifests, and I can dictate what that is. Now, this is difficult for application people as well as operating people, because if I dedicate specific resources to my workloads this way, I have to have a way of watching what resources it uses and watching that amount in a production environment. There's a lot of security problems, a lot of other problems that come from this, and so doing that in the way that they're looking at doing it is actually pretty smart, because they're reducing the overhead to basically spend the amount of time to create all of that documentation, say what resources are being utilized, all of that stuff that wastes time and money, and they're taking it and putting it into a automated right-sizing solution that is able to right-size quickly and be able to kind of monitor and watch how your workloads are actually being deployed and running in your environment. It's really interesting. I really enjoyed the solution set in the discussion, because when we get into the particulars in Kubernetes, those default resources that you have available to you are things like an HPA and a VPA. An HPA is a horizontal pod autoscaler. So when we look at horizontally scaling, we're talking about basically adding more pods into a deployment, into an automated application. When we're looking at a VPA, we're looking at building up, right? So it's a vertical pod autoscaler. Now, that's basically adding resources into that workload. What this means is that the workload is going to be granted more resources than it thought it needed. Now, what's interesting about this, and I'm going to remove that weird, that was weird. What's interesting about this is the solution for both of these has a dedicated pooling interval, and those are around 15 seconds, right? So if you are using the default, now you can manually change that with some switches if you want to. However, that has other problems that can run with it as well, right? So you have the possibility of creating some other problems for you if you go that direction. Doing it this way, it's an enterprise solution. It is scalable. It's allowable for you to have support and be able to watch what resources are being utilized in your Kubernetes cluster. And it also has a manual mode, which basically will alert you and tell you what it would do in certain scenarios, so you can have a better understanding, comfort level, maybe. Probably that's the way that we should phrase that in terms of what it's going to do before you turn it on to a fully automatic mode. Now, I think that basically covers some of the stuff that we saw from Stormforge. This does integrate with CI/CD. So when we're looking at the deployment methodology behind it, allowing yourself to be able to deploy to CI/CD is really powerful because it just directly connects through the solution set. And then it has some visualization, so you can see like kind of where you are and where you should be and what Stormforge is going to do for you in those areas. And it does all of this stuff through machine learning and a couple of other things. Based off of what we heard today, there is a SaaS area, and then there is a local Helm chart that's being deployed into your Kubernetes cluster to deploy these solutions. So it's very, I would say the maturation of this solution is pretty impressive. I really like to see where they're going to go with this. And being a VROPS guy, right sizing is a big deal in the virtual environment. And Eric Wright was in the room, and he was a Turbonomics guy. And we both understood where right sizing is and why it's such a big deal in the enterprise environments that we work with day to day. So seeing this at the Kubernetes level was really an interesting feature. Now, the other person that other vendor that we heard from today was Commvault/Metallic. Now, this was very interesting. I am not a security person by any means, so understand that this is coming from a very high level of what I understand, but I have gone through security incidents before, and so I have a better understanding of what it's like to go through the problematic areas for pen testing, for ransomware, these things that we shudder at night and worry about, because at the end of the day, these things are not a question of if they will happen, but when they will happen, right? So looking at what Metallic brought to us, they brought a very specific solution, which was called Metallic ThreatWise. And what ThreatWise is doing is it's basically creating lures and sensors, and you can call it traps based off of a acquisition of TrapX that they were able to bring in. And they are making it so that if a bad actor gets into your environment, that bad actor is going to start running scans to try to find different things like your Active Directory and other areas as well. He might be looking for older operating systems, and we talked about that a little bit. I even kind of shudder at this, but I think it would be interesting to create like a old operating system, like a Windows operating system that's much older and end of life, and deploying it into my environment just so that I can create a honeypot based off of this sensor data, so bad actors will see that as a real quick and easy way of owning my data. But once they try, now they're in a honeypot, and now they've moved into this one area, and I've been alerted, and I can block their IP or try to do other things in order to pull their access from my environment. So this was actually very, very cool. And it's worth mentioning that this does not take action for the bad actors that come into your environment. What this does is it slows them down. Analogy that I think, or if I was going to tell a story about what it would do, is if you are in a museum, let's say the Mona Lisa is up there on the wall, and we basically created multiple Mona Lisas in the museum, and someone got into the museum and said, I'm going to take that Mona Lisa, and he goes to the wall and he grabs one, and as soon as he grabs it, his feet are in tar and he is slowed down. He is still able to move, he is still able to leave, he is just slowed down and doing what he is trying to do. So because of this, a couple of things. Bad actors in your environment are slowed down, they are not removed immediately, and they are not stopped. They are still able to do certain things in your environment. And to that area, I think a lot of people will immediately throw their hands up in the air and say, why do I need this? To me, I immediately saw the value of it, because if you have an alerting solution, which this does, And if you are able to see where the intrusion IP is coming from, which this does as well, you should be able to block that external IP. Now, I'm not saying that everyone has that capability, because there are some SMB solutions, businesses out there that don't have the capability of doing something like that, but there should be a capability for most enterprise solutions out there to do that type of work and to actually shut down that IP. This is all really interesting because of also the amount of things that ThreatWise will do in terms of these lures and solutions. So it starts from the initial built-ins that it's going to deploy, so things like Active Directory and other areas, and those are just automatic. It'll just find it, it'll clone it, it'll create a sensor for it or a lure for it, and then that's where that'll be. You have the ability to also create custom sensors, and so this is basically like that 2003 Windows server, right? I could have that out in my environment, I could create a sensor for it, and then because of that, a bad actor could get into my environment and hit that sensor, and then I'm alerted to their presence. The other storyline that I would think about this, on top of creating multiple Mona Lisas and then them stepping into TAR, is tripwires. There's this kind of concept of once you touch one, then we know that you're there. And that's really powerful, because when we move into these enterprise environments, having that ability to immediately see bad actors and being able to take action against them is really cool. Now, other things that we saw with ThreatWise was a demonstration of the different solutions that they had and what those actually look like. What does a bad actor look like in your environment? And all of that will be within the videos once they hit YouTube. They'll probably be out tomorrow. Actually, yeah, this will actually come out, and when they come out, they'll be available in the description. I'll just put a link for where those are going to be posted, and then if you want to see the full videos specifically for this by Tech Field Day, just check the description. The other things that we did today were more interesting because they were around roundtable discussions on Kubernetes and what is a cloud architect. Around Kubernetes, we discussed, has it bridged the chasm? Are we saying that Kubernetes is now a thing, it's adopted, and we see the value of it? And we had some pretty rousing discussion around that thing. And I have to say that, in my perspective, I definitely believe that Kubernetes has been seen as the value add that it is. I wouldn't say that it is going to be the biggest adoption ever and it's going to change the world, but it has its place. It definitely has its place. Now, the next discussions that we had were in terms of where are we going after Kubernetes? And I think the obvious answer is abstracted Kubernetes, or maybe making Kubernetes even more boring. The idea behind Kubernetes is always going to be containerization. And the value of containerization has not only been accepted and achieved by many enterprise solutions and developers out there, but there are multiple other orchestration layers on top of it. You know, Kubernetes at its core is just an orchestration layer on top of running Kubernetes, not Kubernetes, running containers, excuse me. So if I have a container and I want to run it, what platform will I run it on? Well, I'll probably run it on Kubernetes. It just allows me and many services and solutions around the ecosystem for keeping that container up and running, keeping the deployment up and running, and just allowing that resiliency and durability that we know from Kubernetes and from the containers. The final discussion was really interesting because it was around, what does a cloud architect actually do? It's worth mentioning that this discussion came from a dinner that we had where about 5 of us that are here all have the title of a cloud architect, but we all have extremely different jobs. And the reason for that is because, well, you'll have to see the round table to try to see what we think of in terms of the answer, but I think it has more to do with the lack of understanding of what cloud actually is. And becoming an architect of the cloud means that you are an architect of multiple different areas, such as storage, networking, compute, and even in some ways, applications, DevOps, CI/CD solutions. You're touching basically the lifeblood of a organization. And when you reach a cloud architect, you're kind of brought into a area of leadership, thought leadership, and an area of strategy. What is the next thing? How do we get there? And how do we take that turn? So if you are a cloud architect, I think it would be a great conversation to listen to. Give us your thoughts. Feel free to comment below with any ideas that you think of from these. Are these even helpful, or are these boring as all get out? And yeah, I appreciate you taking the time and joining us. And again, I'm Nathan Bennett, Nathan Bennett on Twitter, and y'all have a wonderful rest of your day.